The champagne glass shattered first. Then came the sound that silenced the entire ballroom, flesh against flesh, sharp and final, echoing off the marble floor of the Whitfield Foundation's annual gala like a gunshot. Daniel Caro staggered back a step, his hand rising to his cheek, his daughter's small fingers tightening around his sleeve. "Don't you ever," said Celeste Whitfield, her voice trembling with fury, diamonds catching the chandelier light as she pointed a shaking finger at his chest, "touch anything in this room again." 300 guests stood frozen, forks hovered mid-air, a waiter froze mid-stride with a tray of hors d'oeuvres. Daniel Caro, 44 years old, single father, dressed in the only suit he owned that still fit right, stood there with a red handprint blooming on his face and his 6-year-old daughter staring up at him with wide, terrified eyes. "Daddy," Maya whispered, "why did the lady hit you?" If you've ever watched someone get humiliated for something they didn't do, stay right here, because what happens in the next 10 minutes is going to change everything you think you know about this night. Hit subscribe right now and turn on that bell, because we drop stories exactly like this one every single week. And trust me, you do not want to miss where this goes. Now back to the story. 6 minutes earlier, Daniel had simply been trying to find a bathroom for his daughter. He worked maintenance for the catering company, contracted to service the Whitfield Foundation Gala, Triumph Events staffing, the kind of company that sent men in black suits to fix broken folding tables and unjam malfunctioning ice sculptures, while 400 of the city's wealthiest people sipped champagne 20 feet away, completely unaware anyone was working at all. Daniel wasn't supposed to bring Maya, but his sitter had cancelled at 4 o'clock, his ex-wife wasn't answering her phone, and the foreman had told him plainly, "Be here at 6 or don't bother showing up Monday." So Maya sat quietly on a folding chair near the service entrance for 2 hours, coloring in a notebook, while her father repaired a generator, replaced a fuse box, and unstuck a stubborn champagne fountain that had begun overflowing onto the dance floor. "I have to go potty, Daddy," she'd whispered at exactly the wrong moment. He'd walked her toward the nearest restroom sign, cutting through the edge of the main ballroom, and that was when it happened. Maya, small and curious and 6 years old, had reached out and brushed her fingers against the hem of a woman's gown as they passed. Just a touch, a child's accidental gesture. The gown belonged to Celeste Whitfield. Celeste turned, saw a small girl's fingers on her $200,000 Valentino, saw a man in a black uniform standing protectively beside her, and something in her face went cold and sharp before Daniel had even opened his mouth to apologize. "Get your hands off me," she snapped, jerking the fabric away so violently that Maya stumbled. "I'm sorry, ma'am, she didn't mean." "Do you know what this dress cost?" Celeste's voice rose, climbing octaves, drawing eyes from nearby tables. "Do you people not teach your children anything?" "Ma'am, please, she's 6. "I don't care how old she is. You don't belong in this part of the room. Staff stays in the back." Daniel felt his jaw tighten, felt 44 years of swallowed dignity rising in his throat, but he kept his voice level, because Maya's hand was in his, and that mattered more than his pride ever would. "We're leaving," he said quietly. "I apologize for the inconvenience." He turned to go. And that's when Celeste Whitfield, billionaire heiress, daughter of the late shipping magnate Theodore Whitfield, the woman whose name was on the gala's gold-embossed invitations, grabbed his arm to stop him from walking away, and when he instinctively pulled back to free himself from her grip, she swung. The slap landed clean across his face. "How dare you put your hands on me," she said, loud enough for the entire ballroom to hear, loud enough that every camera phone in the room was already rising. Daniel stood there, stunned, humiliated, his daughter crying softly against his leg. He hadn't touched her, he hadn't done anything except try to walk away. But the story was already writing itself in the room around him, a maintenance worker, a wealthy heiress, a slap that everyone had witnessed, but almost no one had actually seen clearly enough to know who started it. "Security," Celeste called out, smoothing her dress like she was the one who'd been wronged. "Get this man out of my building." Two security guards in dark suits began moving through the crowd. Maya was sobbing now, clutching her father's leg, and Daniel knelt down to her level, his cheeks still burning red, and whispered the only thing he could think to say. "It's okay, baby. I promise it's okay." It was not okay, and it was about to get much, much worse. But trust me, this story is far from over. Drop a comment right now and tell me, have you ever been blamed for something you didn't do just because of how a room decided to see you? Let me know below. Now keep watching, because someone in that crowd was about to recognize something that would turn this entire night upside down. The first security guard reached Daniel and gripped his arm, not gently. "Sir, you need to come with us." "I didn't touch her," Daniel said, his voice steady despite the fury building behind his ribs. "She grabbed me. I was trying to leave with my daughter." "That's not what it looked like," the guard said. "Then maybe you should ask the 40 people standing closer than you," Daniel said. The second guard, a broad-shouldered man with close-cropped gray hair and the controlled calm of someone who had spent years in rooms far more dangerous than ballrooms, hadn't said a word yet. His name, though Daniel didn't know it then, was Marcus Reyes, Celeste Whitfield's personal head of security for the last 11 years, a man who had served 2 tours overseas before this job and who did not, as a professional rule, jump to conclusions in chaotic rooms. Marcus's eyes moved past the confrontation, past Celeste's furious face, past the murmuring crowd, and landed on Daniel's forearm, where his sleeve had ridden up during the struggle, exposing a faded tattoo just above his wrist. A compass rose, wrapped in a thin braided rope, with 3 small stars beneath it. Marcus Reyes felt something cold drop straight through his chest. "Wait," he said. Everyone turned. "Wait," he said again, louder, stepping forward and raising a hand to stop the first guard from pulling Daniel toward the exit. "Show me your arm." "What?" Daniel said. "Your arm," Marcus said, "right now." Confused, exhausted, his daughter still crying against his leg, Daniel pulled his sleeve up the rest of the way without thinking much of it. Marcus stared at the tattoo for 3 full seconds. Then he said something that silenced was the only sound. Celeste Whitfield blinked. "Marcus, what is happening right now?" Marcus didn't look at her. His eyes were locked on Daniel, on the tattoo, on the man he hadn't seen in 15 years and had spent more nights than he could count wondering whether he was even still alive. "This man," Marcus said slowly, turning to face Celeste directly, his voice carrying across the ballroom with a kind of weight that made the chandelier light feel suddenly very small, "carried me 400 meters on his back after an IED took out our vehicle. I had 2 broken legs and a collapsed lung. He didn't stop. He didn't put me down once. I would not be standing in this room right now. I would not be alive if it weren't for him." Celeste's mouth opened. Nothing came out. "And you just slapped him," Marcus said, "in front of his daughter. If you think this is the twist, stay with me, because it's not even close to over. This story has at least 3 more turns coming, and I promise you the ending is going to wreck you in the best way. Smash that like button right now if you're already invested, because we are just getting started." Celeste Whitfield stood frozen in the middle of her own ballroom, 300 guests watching, phones still raised, the air thick with the kind of silence that comes right before something breaks completely. "I didn't know," she said finally, her voice smaller than it had been all night. "How was I supposed to know?" "You weren't," Marcus said. "That's the point. You didn't ask. You didn't look. You just decided who he was the second you saw the uniform." Celeste's eyes darted toward Daniel, toward Maya, toward the growing crowd of guests who were no longer pretending not to watch. I'm sorry," she said. "I'll apologize. I'll fix this." You can't unslap someone in front of their kid, Marcus said quietly. There's no fixing that. Daniel had not said a word through any of this. He was still kneeling beside Maya, one hand pressed gently against her back, his cheeks still red, his mind racing through 15 years of memory he had spent a long time trying not to revisit. Sergeant Reyes, he finally said, standing slowly. I didn't recognize you, the beard's different. I didn't recognize you either, Marcus said. Not until I saw the tattoo. I got mine removed years ago, couldn't stand looking at it. Yours, I'd know anywhere. I kept mine, Daniel said quietly, because I didn't want to forget the men who didn't come home. Marcus's jaw tightened. He nodded once slowly. Celeste's voice cut back in, thinner now, almost pleading. Please, can we step aside and talk about this privately? I don't want this to. To what? Daniel said, finally turning to face her fully, and for the first time that night, his voice carried an edge that hadn't been there before, not anger exactly, but something close to it, something earned. To get worse. It already got worse the moment you decided my daughter touching your dress was worth raising your hand over. The crowd had pulled in tighter now, phones still recording, several guests whispering to each other behind raised hands. I have a business to think about, Celeste said, lowering her voice, leaning slightly toward him. A foundation, a reputation, if this gets out. It already got out, said a voice from the crowd. A young woman near the front held up her phone. I posted it 40 seconds after it happened. It's already got 11,000 views. Celeste's face went the color of the tablecloths. 40, someone else said. It's at 40,000 now, it's moving fast. Daniel exhaled slowly. He looked down at Maya, who had stopped crying and was now watching the unfolding scene with the cautious stillness of a child who understood something important was happening but couldn't quite name it. I don't want any of this, Daniel said, mostly to himself, mostly to the room. I just wanted to get my daughter to a bathroom. I know, Marcus said, and I'm not going to let this slide, not this time, not for you. He turned to Celeste. Ms. Whitfield, I think it's time you actually heard what this man did, not as your employee, as someone who was there. Celeste's chin lifted slightly, some old defensive instinct trying to surface even now, but something in Marcus's eyes, something in the way the entire room had gone quiet and watchful, made her swallow whatever she'd been about to say. Tell me, she said instead. Before this gets even heavier, and trust me, it does, drop a comment and tell me what you would have done in Daniel's shoes. Would you have walked away, or would you have said something? I want to hear it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time, because the next part of this story is the part nobody in that ballroom expected. Marcus Reyes stood in the center of the gala floor and told the story he had never told at a party, never told a stranger, rarely told anyone at all. Kandahar Province, March 2009, he said. Our convoy hit an IED on a supply route nobody warned us about. 3 vehicles. I was in the second one. The blast flipped us. I broke both legs, cracked 4 ribs, and my lung collapsed inside of about 90 seconds. Everyone in my vehicle who could move did. I couldn't. He paused, his eyes distant for a moment, somewhere 15 years and 6,000 miles away. Daniel was in the 3rd vehicle. He wasn't even supposed to be near us, different unit, different objective that day. But he heard the blast, he came running, and when he found me, he didn't wait for a medic. He didn't wait for a stretcher team. He picked me up himself and carried me 400 meters under what I was later told was sporadic small arms fire to the evac point because he decided in about 2 seconds that I wasn't dying on that road. A woman near the back of the crowd had her hand pressed over her mouth. I weighed 210 pounds in full gear, Marcus continued. He carried me the entire way, never put me down once. The medic who treated me at the evac point told me later that another 10 minutes and I wouldn't have made it. 10 minutes. He looked at Daniel. You saved my life. And I never got the chance to thank you, because by the time I was stable enough to ask who'd carried me in, you'd already been redeployed somewhere else, and I lost track of you for 15 years. The ballroom was utterly silent. Celeste Whitfield stood very still, her earlier fury completely drained from her face, replaced now with something that looked almost like fear, the dawning, sinking realization of exactly what she had done, and exactly how many people had just watched her do it. "I didn't know," she said again, quieter this time. "You keep saying that," Daniel said, not unkindly, just tired. "But you didn't ask either. That's the part that's hard to get past." Maya tugged gently on her father's sleeve. "Daddy, is the lady going to say sorry now?" The question, asked in the small, clear voice of a 6-year-old, landed in that ballroom harder than the slap had. Celeste knelt down, actually knelt, in her Valentino gown, on the marble floor in front of a child, and looked Maya directly in the eyes. "I am so sorry," she said, and her voice cracked on the last word. "I was wrong. I was wrong about your daddy, and I was wrong to hurt him, and I am going to make this right. I promise you that." Maya studied her for a long moment, with the unflinching honesty only children possess. "You should say sorry to him too," Maya said, "not just to me." Celeste turned to Daniel. She stood, smoothing her dress, her composure visibly fighting its way back into place even as her eyes remained red. "Daniel," she said, "I am deeply sorry. There is no excuse for what I did. None. I let an assumption about who you were override every basic decency I should have shown a stranger, let alone someone who has done more for this country, and as it turns out, for someone I care about, than I will ever fully understand." Daniel said nothing for a moment. He looked at Marcus. He looked at his daughter. He looked, finally, at Celeste. "Apology accepted," he said. "But I think we both know an apology doesn't undo what happened in front of 300 people and 100 phone cameras." Celeste flinched, but didn't argue. "What do you want me to do?" she asked. "This is where it gets interesting, and if you've made it this far, you already know this story isn't going to end with just an apology. Like this video right now if you want to see how this turns, because what happens in the next few minutes changes everything for Daniel and his daughter, and I promise it's worth the wait." Daniel was quiet for a long moment, the entire ballroom holding its breath around him. "I don't want your money," he finally said. "I'm not interested in a payout to make this go away quietly. I want this handled the right way, in front of the same people who watched you slap me." Celeste nodded slowly. "Okay. I want you to mean what you said to my daughter," Daniel continued. "Not because cameras are out, because it's true." "It is true," Celeste said. "I mean every word of it." Marcus stepped forward then, his voice steady. "Ms. Whitfield, if I may, Daniel runs a small contracting business. 3 employees, including himself. He's been trying to get it certified for veteran-owned federal contracts for over a year. The paperwork backlog alone has nearly put him under twice." Daniel's head turned sharply. "Marcus." "You never told me that," Marcus said. "I found out tonight, going through the staffing roster after I recognized your name on the contractor list. I should have recognized it sooner, honestly. I just never thought I'd see it again." Celeste looked between the two men. "Is this true?" Daniel exhaled. "It's true. It's been a hard year. That's not why I'm telling this story tonight, though. I didn't come here for charity." "I'm not offering charity," Celeste said, and for the first time that night, something steady entered her voice, something that sounded less like panic and more like the woman who had actually built a foundation worth billions. "The Whitfield Foundation funds veterans' small business grants. It's one of our oldest programs. My father started it. I have apparently been too disconnected from my own foundation's work to even recognize what was standing in front of me tonight." She turned to the crowd, raising her voice so it carried to every table. "I owe this man an apology that goes beyond words," she said, "and I intend to make sure that everyone in this room and everyone watching whatever's been filmed tonight sees exactly how this gets made right." She turned back to Daniel. "Effective tonight, your business is fully funded through our Veteran Contractor Grant Program. No application backlog, no review committee, approved on my signature alone, tonight. And I will be personally overseeing your federal certification paperwork until it's resolved, because apparently that backlog has been failing people like you for too long, and that's on me too." Daniel stood very still. I don't need. You don't need it, Celeste interrupted gently, but you've earned it 10 times over, and pretending otherwise doesn't fix what I did. Let me do this, please. Daniel looked down at Maya, who was watching him with hopeful, uncertain eyes, then back at Celeste. Okay, he said quietly, okay. The room, which had been holding its breath for nearly 20 minutes, finally exhaled, and somewhere near the back, someone actually started clapping, slow at first, then spreading until the entire ballroom was applauding, not for Celeste, not for the spectacle, but for the quiet, steady man standing in the middle of it with his daughter's hand in his. We're almost at the end of this one, and I promise you it's worth sticking around for. Comment below right now if you think Celeste's apology was enough, or if you think she still owed more. I want to know where you stand. And don't forget to subscribe, because next week's story might just be the one that breaks you completely. 3 weeks later, Daniel stood in the doorway of his shop, Caro contracting, the sign freshly repainted, the federal certification paperwork finally, officially closed, watching Maya color at the same folding table she'd once colored at backstage during a gala that had nearly broken something in both of them. Marcus Reyes had stopped by twice since that night, once to check on them, once just to sit and talk about names. Neither of them had spoken aloud in over a decade, men who hadn't made it home, men whose memories had quietly settled into both their chests for 15 years without anywhere to go. You ever think about it? Marcus had asked him the second visit, the two of them sitting on overturned crates in the half-finished shop. That day. Every day, Daniel had said, but I try to remember it different now. I used to remember the blast. Now I try to remember that you walked into my shop 15 years later alive, with kids of your own, because somebody decided you were worth carrying. Marcus hadn't said anything to that. He just nodded, once, the way men do when words would only get in the way. Celeste Whitfield had kept her word. The grant had come through in full. The federal certification, stuck for over a year, had cleared in 11 days once someone with actual influence finally picked up the phone. She had also, quietly without cameras this time, visited the shop once, alone, no entourage, no statement prepared, and sat with Maya for 20 minutes while Daniel finished a job, the two of them coloring together at the same folding table, Celeste asking Maya question after question about her favorite colors and her favorite animals like the answers actually mattered to her. She's not what I expected, Daniel had told Marcus afterward. People rarely are, Marcus had said, once you actually let them show you who they are. That goes both ways, by the way. Tonight, the shop's new sign caught the last of the evening light, and Maya looked up from her coloring book. Daddy. Yeah, baby. Are we okay now? Daniel crossed the room and crouched down beside her, the same way he had that night in the ballroom, except this time there was no red mark on his cheek, no fear in his daughter's eyes, just the quiet hum of a shop that finally, after 15 years and one terrible, transformative night, belonged entirely to him. Yeah, he said, we are more than okay. Maya smiled and went back to her coloring, and Daniel stood there for a long moment, watching her, thinking about how the worst nights sometimes carry the seeds of the best ones if you're patient enough and honest enough and lucky enough to have the right person recognize you when it matters most. If this story moved you tonight, tell us in the comments which moment hit hardest. Was it the slap? Was it the tattoo? Or was it Maya asking if the lady would say sorry? Subscribe right now if you haven't already, hit that bell so you never miss the next one, and share this with someone who needs a reminder tonight that the truth has a way of finding the light, even in the most unexpected rooms. We'll see you in the next story.